Morning we begin our Vipassana inquiry into the nature of the mind and into the nature of appearances that are arising within the mind. And so this is really a powerful integration of Shamata and Vipassana, of both the stable, vivid awareness of Shamata, where when we achieve Shamata actually, and we are resting in the essential nature of the mind, now we are in a perfect position to inquire about the nature of that mind. And then the results and the answers come very quickly when we have already eliminated all the obscurations that are preventing us from experiencing the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss of the essential nature of the relative mind. And then when we are resting in that, then we inquire, who is it that's experiencing this luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss? What is the nature of this awareness that remains, even in this very stripped down, limited form, in its essential form? The essential form that is not even human, but that we share this stem consciousness that we share with all sentient beings. What is the nature of that? And can we cut through that, actually, and cut through the identification with that? Because even when we are resting only in this very subtle state of mind, the essential nature of the mind, there is still a slight grasping to this luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss. And so we need to cut through that in order to experience primordial consciousness. And normally, in the classic progression, Shamata is achieved first, and then you practice Vipassana. I know it can seem different in the modern, modern meditation practices, because a lot of people don't concern themselves in a lot of traditions these days, which the Dalai Lama has commented upon and is actually quite disappointed in, you could say, that the absence of emphasis on shamatha practice among many traditions now. But traditionally, classically, you achieve shamatha first, and then you apply yourself to Vipassana, because then your Vipassana practice can become very powerful. And then, in this tradition, on the other hand, as well, Dujam Lingpa says, you don't wait until you actually achieve shamatha to practice Vipassana, because you practice enough Vipassana as you are practicing shamatha, so that you aren't to eliminate mental afflictions or to reduce the intensity and the frequency of mental afflictions. And so that these appearances that are appearing so clearly to you now in your stable, vivid awareness, that you don't grasp to these as being truly existent. And so it's very helpful, because if we do grasp to these as truly existent, we reify them, then we become mentally afflicted. We crave these, or we feel aversion for them, because we believe that these are truly a source of the experience that I'm having of being lustful or something that is going to be a cause of my happiness. We can have a very clear awareness of a sense of happiness, have a clear appearance of an object there, and with shamatha practice, not have the wisdom to see that this appearance is not the actual cause of my happiness. So it takes the wisdom to actually perceive reality And then that is also going to support our development of Shamata practice. And this is the way that Master Kamalashila put it in his second stages of meditation. He says, with bare insight that lacks serenity, the yogi's mind is distracted by objects. So if you only have wisdom or insight without shamatha, then your mind is going to be distracted by objects. Like an oil lamp in the wind, it will not be stable. For this reason, what sublime wisdom sees will not be very clear. And so this is the problem that is naturally occurring when people apply themselves to vipassana practice without having any stability and clarity of shamatha. You can easily, or you have quite frequently, people have insights based on their analysis, or simply just spontaneous insights arise. I think everyone in this room probably has had a very profound experience of non-duality. I would just guess that, because it's not all that uncommon that people have just spontaneously something, triggers. You're out for a walk or you're doing yoga. Something happens where all of a sudden you have this profound shift of awareness, and you experience this non-duality of perception and awareness, etc. Or you might be doing analysis on a particular topic of emptiness or dependent origination, and you're out for a walk, and all of a sudden insight strikes. So it's not uncommon for these insights to arise, but they're not stable. And so what is absolutely necessary for what in developmental psychology is called a peak experience, so these momentary insights of emptiness, of non-duality, you could say are a peak experience, and they do have power. They can transform your life, in a sense. They can reorient your life. If you have a direct experience of impermanence, for instance, that can really motivate you to pursue a meaningful life. But these things still are not permanent. You go back to looking at the world basically the same way that you were before. And when you achieve shamatha, then the insights become truly transformative. They become stable, and once you achieve them, then you don't lose them. And this is probably because shamatha itself, rather than being a peak experience, is called in developmental psychology a stage development. You achieve a new stage, and like the acquisition of language, for instance. When you learn language, every morning when you wake up, you don't have to start over again, trying to learn a vocabulary or something. When you acquire language, you have it, and it's there for you to use for the rest of your life, until the very end, anyway. So shamatha is itself a stage development. When you achieve true shamatha, you have it for the rest of your life. The Dalai Lama says that, very exceptional circumstances could you perhaps lose it, but you would almost have to be trying. You would have to have some really profound shift, which is very unusual or be very unlikely. So once you achieve samadhi of shamatha, effortless single-pointed concentration, it's there for the rest of your life. And so this is probably why then, because you have now this stage development, that everything that you learn by applying this very powerful new samadhi to becomes a permanent or a stage development also. So then your analysis or your inquiry about the nature of the world then becomes the direct perception of emptiness very quickly after the development of shamatha. So shamatha is necessary for making insight stable. But then on the other hand, Master Kamalashila says also, however, without such insight into the real nature, no matter how long you cultivate shamatha, you can only suppress manifest afflictions. You cannot eradicate their seeds. And this was the Buddha's great innovation in Indian philosophy. Because at the time of the Buddha, there was already very highly developed technology for developing samadhi, for shamatha. And so this was in fact considered the pinnacle of spiritual experience at the time of the Buddha, that when you achieve shamatha and then progress through the jhanas after that, that this actually was moksha, that this was liberation. But the Buddha then discovered that, because he mastered the jhanas and shamatha, that when you come down, the seeds of these mental afflictions were still there, and that these mental afflictions were waiting for you. They hadn't been transformed at all, simply by taking a vacation from them. And so the Buddha then sought an irreversible freedom from kleshas, from mental afflictions. And he realized that to do that, insight was necessary. And so there were also, at the time of the Buddha, profound theories about the nature of reality. So there was basically vipassana practice, and there was insight and shamatha practice at the time of the Buddha. But the Buddha's great innovation was to integrate these two into a single practice, and to do shamatha practice, to do vipassana practice based on shamatha. And so you first enter and achieve that very stable, vivid awareness, and then you ask questions about the nature of the mind and the nature of appearances that are arising to the mind. This is how Dujam Lingpa put the importance of vipassana practice at this stage. In his Essence of Clear Meaning, in short, these practices from shamatha to luminous cognizant consciousness and the substrate consciousness, as taught previously, constitute the phase of taking the aspects of the mind as the path. But as long as it is divorced from the vipassana of knowing the nature of existence, this does not bring you even a hair's breadth closer to the path of liberation from the suffering of mundane existence and the path of omniscience that liberates from the two extremes. Thus, even if you strive diligently in these practices for a long time, this does nothing more than perpetuate samsara. So understand how your life will certainly have been spent in vain. This was, again, the Buddha's great realization, that shamatha alone does not liberate, and that if you dedicate your practice only to shamatha, even though it is absolutely essential for all of the higher stages of realization, that if that's all you achieve, and you become seduced by the luminosity, non-conceptuality, and bliss of substrate consciousness, and you just say, what could be better than this? I think this is just fine for this lifetime. I'm happy. Samsara is smiling on me right now, as long as I am meditating. And then this is why perhaps you would need to, in order to maintain this type of happiness, just spend the rest of your life in retreat. And just spend as much time in shamatha, actually, as possible. And then that would be what you would think of as happiness. But unfortunately, all you would be doing then would be planting seeds for rebirth in either the form or the formless realm. And so you will not have actually left samsara, but all you have been doing is actually planting seeds to perpetuate samsara. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says in volume 3 of the Lamrim Chenmo, the mark of meditative serenity, and again this is how Alan Wallace was translating shamatha, meditative serenity at that point. So now we'll just call it shamatha. The mark of shamatha is that your attention stays right where it is placed, without distraction from the object of meditation. The mark of insight is that you know the reality of selflessness. If you engage in analysis with a wisdom possessed of shamatha, a state undisturbed by laxity or excitement, then you will understand the meaning of reality. So there you have it. You do the analysis of insight meditation based on, and while you are actually dwelling in, this very stable, vivid attention of shamatha, and then your realizations will become stable, and as Lama Tsongkhapa says, then you will understand the meaning of reality. So vipassana practice always involves an inquiry. And these can be the very elaborate syllogisms of Nagarjuna, for instance, or it can be analytical type meditation. It can be the very foundation of all vipassana practice is called the Satipatthana, or the 4 applications of mindfulness that the Buddha taught in the Satipatthana Sutta. So this is basically the start of all vipassana practice. But all of these ask a question. So you are, and what is important is that you hold the question in the background, especially in this integration of vipassana and shamatha. You bring very clearly an object to mind, and with your stable, vivid awareness of shamatha, you examine it very closely. And then with vipassana inquiry in the background, you have a question about these phenomena or this appearance as it is right there in front of you. You examine it closely. You do scientific inquiry, basically, on this appearance that you are seeing so clearly with shamatha. And so that is why we can see, I think, that this practice of simultaneous stillness and motion in taking aspects of the mind as the path is such a powerful preparation, because we are resting there with still awareness, watching appearances as they arise. These appearances are appearing clearly to us. We're seeing them for what they are, and then we can ask questions about them without disturbing our shamatha engagement with them. So this is a very important piece of advice that you find in the Lamrim, in the Vipassana section there, is that the Vipassana inquiry should always be in the background of your mind, and it shouldn't disturb your single-pointed focus on the object that you are examining. So if your inquiry comes to the foreground, then you have lost science. Basically, you have lost the investigation. And all you're doing is analytical meditation. Then what you're doing is reasoning and coming up with a coherent explanation that you could defend in debate. But you are not actually examining a particular object with these questions. So what we are going to be doing in this retreat is using let's say a method of vipassana, or 4 questions of analysis that I think are perfectly tailored for our practice of taking aspects of the mind as the path. And this comes out of, these 4 questions actually come out of the Mahamudra tradition, and especially the Mahamudra tradition as it was presented by probably the most important figure in all of the Mahamudra lineages, the 9th Karmapa, Wangchuk Dorje. And Wangchuk Dorje wrote 3 very important texts that almost all of Mahamudra ever since is a commentary upon. And the longest of these, which is a thick volume that covers the entire path from beginning of developing shamatha all the way through full awakening, is called The Ocean of Definitive Meaning. And then the middle length treatise that he wrote is called Dispelling the Darkness of Ignorance. And then the third and the briefest of his texts on Mahamudra is called Pointing Out the Dharmakaya. And so these 4 points of instruction come from that shortest of his 3 texts, Pointing Out the Dharmakaya. And when I first encountered these a few years ago, as they were cited in the text Spacious Path to Freedom, I don't know, it was very exhilarating for me. And I realized immediately how this could be so well integrated with this particular practice that we're doing of taking aspects of the mind as the path. So one of the really extraordinary things... What does that say? My something fell on the floor. It was put back on your table. Oh, this one. Oh, okay. Thank you. So one of the important things, or one of the exhilarating things, really, about these 4 points of Wangchuk Dorje is that it seems to me that this is not only a very simple, precise way, while we are doing the practice of simultaneous stillness and motion, to actually cut through to pristine awareness. But it is also a description of the view of reality from pristine awareness. So again, it is like much of Dzogchen practice. It is taking the fruit as the path and then using those, basically what we are going to achieve as a way of achieving the fruit. So here is what Wangchuk Dorje has to say, that how we can view these appearances as they are arising to us while we are resting in still awareness. He says, "Now all objective appearances are like water and waves. All are apparitions of the mind, and in reality are unestablished. By realizing this, one recognizes all appearances as the mind. So this is the first point of the four. As you are watching these appearances, basically you recognize that you're dreaming. You recognize that these are not appearances of something, but basically these are only just mental appearances that you are watching. And that you are, in essence, while you are doing this practice then of simultaneous stillness and motion, what you are doing is lucid dreaming in the waking state. And so this is why this becomes quite easy to realize when you are resting in this stillness and lucidity, because all of these appearances that are arising to you, you naturally recognize as appearances of mind. Because that is the definition of lucidity. You recognize appearances for what they are. The non-lucidity believes that the pigs are flying, the water runs uphill, that you take all of these appearances at face value as being true. But in a lucid dream, you recognize that all of these appearances are nothing more than appearances of mind itself. So this is the first point. As you're resting there, appearances arise, and you first of all recognize all appearances as the mind. And by analyzing the essence of the mind in terms of going, staying, and arising, it turns out not to be established as anything. So like horses and elephants in a dream, it is unestablished in reality. By realizing this, one recognizes that the mind is empty. So this is the second point. And we will, for each of these points, we will have a separate session. And so we will really be able to focus our Vipassana practice, first of all, on, and what we'll do this morning, is really beginning to examine this point, all appearances are mind. And if you really were intrigued by this practice, and you really wanted to make this the focus of your practice, even in a very long retreat, you could easily do that. And just use these 4 points to organize all of your study, all of your research, seek out teachings, all based on these 4 points. And there basically are many, many, many different texts, different teachings, all leading to this same realization that all appearances are mind. And so you can just use that as more or less your organizing principle for investigating and really enriching then your experience of shamatha while you are resting, watching these appearances, and just have a deeper and deeper understanding that this appearance is mind. I am actually watching the mind now. I am not watching some external concrete object. This is simply the mind, and this appearance has no more substantiality than the appearance in a dream. And then you can then, or the second point that you could use to organize all of your Vipassana inquiry and your study, your seeking out teachings, would be the emptiness of the mind. So there could be a temptation, Gyatro Rinpoche says, that once you recognize all appearances are mind, then to reify the mind and say, well, the mind then must be the irreducible identity of who I am. That's it. So this basically become a Chittamatran or mind-only practitioner. That the mind then is the one real substance. So what you do then is you have to seek out and realize that appearances are mind, mind is empty. And then this is the one, the next point, this third point, is the one that is really distinctly Dzogchen and Mahamudra, because it goes right to this difference between the New Translation and Old Translation schools and understanding of what emptiness is. So in most of the New Translation schools, aside from Mahamudra, emptiness is described in the Prasangika schools as sheer absence, a simple negation or a complex negation. So basically in Dzogchen practice then, and so it has no positive qualities, and there is nothing that you can say, there is no generic emptiness, but every object has its own emptiness. And so emptiness is the emptiness of a particular object. And in Dzogchen and Mahamudra, emptiness is something different. So here is how Wangchuk Dorji describes that. From the state of emptiness, clarity and limpidity in unceasing great joy, it spontaneously arises as manifold appearances, like the moon's reflection in water. By realizing this, one recognizes, number 3, the point, one recognizes emptiness as spontaneous actualization. So here then, emptiness is not a sheer absence, but emptiness is the what is called the absolute space of phenomena. It is the space that is non-dual from luminosity while you're resting in pristine awareness. That gives rise, this is the, you could say, the absolute ground from which all appearances arise. And so it is almost the opposite of a sheer absence, in that it is the sheer potentiality of everything. So everything that can possibly manifest is going to be in this ground. The potential for it is going to be arising out of this ground. And so then here, emptiness is not sheer absence, but it is spontaneous actualization, the spontaneous arising of appearances. And thus, from simple spontaneous actualization, arising and release occur spontaneously, without wavering from immutable great bliss that is clear, empty, spontaneous, and free of elaboration, like a snake that unravels its own knots. By ascertaining this, one recognizes the 4th point, one recognizes spontaneous actualization as self-liberating. So all of these appearances that arise out of emptiness as mind also spontaneously self-release. So this is why appearances are never the problem, because they have a built-in life expectancy. They arise from the ground and they dissolve back into the ground spontaneously. So as we are vividly resting in our Shamata practice, watching appearances arise to this stable, vivid awareness, then we can just watch them as we and observe them, and with this inquiry in the back of our mind, just observe them and see all appearances are mind. And this becomes easy to see, actually, because you are looking at the space of the mind, and these appearances, and you have become at this point very familiar with the space of the mind, and consciousness and awareness is being still, clear, luminous, and spacious. And so you are watching the space of the mind, and movement arise in this space. And so you recognize that these appearances are arising within this space, but they are not other than that space. And so they are like the waves of water on the ocean. The waves are not other than the ocean. There is a non-duality between wave and water. So we'll use this template for our Vipassana practice and begin with all appearances are mind, and begin to investigate that point from a Dzogchen view. So in the text Vajra Essence, which is another text that was revealed to Dujam Lingpa by Padmasambhava in the form of the lake-born Vajra directly. The lake-born Vajra states, there was somebody in the vision, it's like being in a Pure Land. So you had Padmasambhava teaching, and then you had a group of apparitional disciples that were asking questions. And so one of these disciples, named the Faculty of Luminosity, asked, "O teacher, Bhagavan, if they are not established as being real, but are unreal in that way, from what do all phenomena arise and appear? May the teacher explain." So far the emphasis on the Bhagavan's teaching in that presentation had been on emptiness. And so now the Faculty of Luminosity asks, well, if all things are empty, how do they arise, or from what do they arise? And then the lake-born Vajra replies, "O Faculty of Luminosity, grasping to an identity acts as the primary cause, and conceptualization acts as the contributing condition, due to which phenomena emerge as mere appearances. When the initial moment of consciousness moves to an object, the appearance arises suddenly." Oh, okay, so I'll go a little more slowly. From the beginning? Okay, O Faculty of Luminosity, grasping to an identity acts as the primary cause, and conceptualization acts as the contributing condition, due to which phenomena emerge as mere appearances. When the initial moment of consciousness moves to an object, the appearance arises suddenly. So here you have it. Exactly. What is the dependent origination? Because dependent origination is always involving causes and conditions, right? What is it that is really makes an object, a thing? Does it have an inherent existence of its own, or is it dependently arisen, depending on causes and conditions? And of course, the two are the dependent origination is a proof of emptiness, and emptiness means basically that something is dependently originated. And so here is the primary cause. It is grasping to an I. And this is what, when we went through what I call the architecture of the impure mind, remember we started off with, and that architecture of the impure mind is describing how samsaric appearances come into existence. So it begins with the unawareness of substrate, the luminous nature of substrate consciousness that makes appearances possible, And then that third element is klishta-manas, afflicted mentation, the basic sense of I am. And then from that basic sense of I am, and this is exactly what the Lake-born Vajra is describing here, from that, all of mentation, all of mental consciousness arises. And then in mental consciousness, eventually conceptualization, and then the conceptualization that reifies appearances, grasps to them as real, and then from that, all mental afflictions arise as well. And so here the Lake-born Vajra is saying is that the primary cause of all appearances is this grasping to an I. And then the cooperative condition is conceptualization. Then he continues, all phenomena are mere appearances arising from dependently related events and nothing more. There is certainly nothing whatsoever that is truly existent from its own side. And then he goes through a very brief description of that architecture of the impure mind. When waking consciousness emerges in progression from the substrate, first is the substrate consciousness, followed by afflictive mentation, and various appearances. Without the sense of self introduced by afflictive mentation, also called the I maker, in Sanskrit the ahamkara. Oh, got that? No appearance can arise. This causal grasping at identity occurs at a primeval level. The conceptualization that follows is secondary. Through the combination of these two, the primary cause and the contributing condition, all appearances manifest. So here you can see that so far, everything, the primary cause and the secondary condition of conceptuality, both of these are aspects of mind. So all of appearances depend on aspects of mind. So when then Wangchuk Dorje says, all appearances are mind, you can see exactly why that would be true. Because all appearances depend on the primary cause of I am and the secondary cause of all the conceptualizations then that flow out of a conditioned mind. And then just a few more citations of great texts that cite this. This is again from Karma Chagme in another great Mahamudra master in Spacious Path to Freedom. When there is the self, there is the discernment of others. Grasping and hatred occur towards the factions of self and other, and in relation we construct ourselves as if we were truly existent, and we fabricate a tangible, truly existent environment around us. So we grasp to an I, and from this grasping to I, all of the rest of appearances arise, and we grasp to those as being inherently existent in the same way that this I is inherently existent. And so we have just torn reality into two pieces, subject here and object over there. An object is something really distinct from me. This is the fundamental delusion that these appearances of other are something other than mind. And then in the enlightened view of Samantabhadra, this is a text in which Samantabhadra is teaching directly to Dujam Lingpa and a group of apparitional disciples. Samantabhadra states, O son of the family, here is how to distinguish between the mind and pristine awareness. Mind is the essential nature of samsara. Its cause is ignorance. Its illusory apparitions are appearances. Its creative expressions are thoughts, and its displays are deceptive reality. And then the Buddha himself also comments in this vein. In the Perfection of Wisdom in 20,000 Lines, the Buddha states, Subhuti, a bodhisattva reviews all phenomena as similar to an apparition, a dream, a mirage, an echo, an image, a reflection of the moon in the water, a magical creation, a village of the sprites. Even nirvana, I say, is like a dream, like an illusion. If I could apprehend any phenomenon more exalted than nirvana, of that also I should say that it is like a dream, like an illusion. The Lord has said that dream and waking are indistinguishable. Ultimately, all phenomena are like a dream. So we first must awaken to the dream, and then we awaken from the dream. So we recognize, first of all, that all appearances are mind. We cut through that, and then we continue our investigation and realize that mind itself is empty. We cut through the dream, actually. First of all, we realize that all appearances are a dream, and then we cut through the dream itself. And so, of course, just so that we don't fall off one of the extremes, the cliff of nihilism, this doesn't mean that there is no physical reality at all. But physical reality, or let's just say a physical world, is created by physical causes and conditions rather than mental causes and conditions. And so this is the world that is so very precisely described by science. All of the interrelationships that go into producing physical phenomena. But do we ever see physical phenomena as anything other than an appearance to mind? And what would it mean to say there is a real physical phenomena independent of perception of it? This exactly is what Heisenberg was refuting, saying, let us not attribute existence to that which is in principle unknowable. It doesn't mean anything. Because it's unknowable, you would have to say that it doesn't exist. So a world that exists independent of perception, which is the world of classical physics, in which all of the point of physics was to try to get what was called a God's eye view of the world, the view of God of the world, so when no humans were looking. So this was what all of the early physicists were also theologians. And this is what they were trying to do, to try to attain the mind of God through the world of His creation and understanding it precisely and measuring it. And so this was the point of early physics, to try to get a view of reality when no one was looking. And then the great revolution in 20th century physics was to realize that that is impossible. You can't say that such a world exists, even, because it's meaningless to ask the question, what does it mean, what kind of reality exists when no one is looking, when no one is perceiving? Yeah, it doesn't compute. So there is a physical world, but each of these are, the physical world is going to appear to us, to each of us, as an individualized appearance. And so, we have some commonality. We agree on, that this is the color red here, because all of us were trained by our mothers saying, Doogie, this is red. Can you say red? Very good. Very good. Yet all of us went through the same thing. We all went through the same training. This is red. But how do I know that your experience of that color is the same as mine? We all have a convergence of opinion. But what does that look like to a dog? Or almost any other mammal, for instance, other than primates? Almost all mammals see the world with no color. No color at all. They see the world in black and white. So this is why hunters, when they go into the woods trying to kill a deer, wear orange, because humans can see the orange, and so they can see the other hunters. But deer can't see them. So only primates, some birds like geese, pollinating insects also see color. But for most of animals, they would see that entirely differently. So the physical reality is the same, but the perception is entirely different. And each of us would have a slightly different perception depending on our angle of view of it, the reflection of light off it, etc. So the appearance is slightly different. And then what does that look like to a snake, especially a rattlesnake? A rattlesnake, like in the United States, you don't have those here, I don't think. So they're pit vipers, classes. And so pit vipers perceive the world as infrared, patterns of infrared that come through their little pits here in their nose, and they just see the world as patterns of infrared. Bats navigate and perceive the world by echolocation, by sonar, basically. They send out pulses of sound, basically, that are reflected back to them, and this is how they perceive the world. So the physical reality is the same for all of us beings. I mean, the causes and conditions that created all of this, but all of us beings perceive the world differently. The appearances that are arising to this mind of mine is so different than the mind of a bat, even though the physical reality that we are perceiving, you could say, is the same. Those causes and conditions, those bases of parts, all of those are the same, but the appearance is entirely mine, uniquely mine. So the appearance, all appearances are mine, even though the physical reality, is something else. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said something very interesting, and I haven't cited which text this was, or it could have been in a talk. But His Holiness said that not satisfied with appearances, of phenomena, we grasp onto them as inherently existent. And just imagine the difference in your perception of the world and your experience of the world if you were satisfied with appearances. Simply to recognize that these are appearances and these appearances are mine, rather than appearances of something. Because normally what we do is we take this appearance that is arising to me to be an appearance of something that exists independent of my mind, and that I am just getting a true, real picture of it, and that I like this particular thing, and so I want to have it, I want to possess it, because I feel it is a cause of my happiness to have it or possess it. And so we grasp onto things, external things, as if they were real, because we're not satisfied with mere appearances. And so it's a lot less expensive to be satisfied with appearances, isn't it? That just, you don't have to have the Mercedes to be happy. You can just be happy and have an appearance of Mercedes in your mind and recognize that the Mercedes anyway is only just a picture in your mind, and it could never do anything other than be a picture of in your mind. Yangtang Rinpoche, who again is this great Dzogchen master who recently died in Sikkim, and one of Lama Ellen's Dzogchen lamas, and another one of these great lamas who was imprisoned by the Chinese for 17 years. So amazing to think that the Chinese were trying to eliminate Buddhism in Tibet by locking up and torturing all of these extraordinary lamas simply because they were lamas, because they were tulkus, because they were recognized as high practitioners. And it didn't work. It certainly created havoc for Dharma in Tibet. But what's extraordinary to me is just so many stories coming out of these, when these lamas were finally released from prison, and some of them made it to the West and have become extraordinary teachers here. I think every tradition has examples of this. But how these teachers used the experience of prison and even the torture that they were suffering in prison as a way of developing their Dharma practice and became extraordinary practitioners. There are just many of these who developed groups of disciples there, and great teachers like Khenpo Munsel, who was the teacher of Garchen Rinpoche. They were all in prison together. All of them then became great practitioners in this retreat of a concentration camp. And so Yangtang Rinpoche is one of these, and he was recognized by all of his peers in the Nyingma lineage as being a Vijayadhara, somebody who is what is called an awareness holder, somebody who has stabilized in Rikpa, in pristine awareness. And he is somebody who is said to, when prisoners would run out of food, he would be able to manifest food. He would be able to, in order just to torment the guards at the camp, he would just emanate outside the gates. And then they would just bring him in every time he would do that, because he wasn't trying to escape. He was just messing with their minds. So anyway, this is what Yangtang Rinpoche has to say about this also. The first moment of perceptual awareness is usually okay. For example, when looking at a tree, that very first moment of awareness is okay. It doesn't make any mistake. But mistakes always happen from the second moment of awareness. So it's important not to let those mistakes continue. The first moment is like a mute, someone who can't talk, who cannot speak but can see everything. So you're not mentally talking back to reality, you're just experiencing it. The second moment, involving conceptualizations, is like somebody who is blind but who can talk very well. If you let the conceptual mind continue, it leads to the distractions, dualistic grasping, and delusion. So how can we investigate this second moment of perception and know the difference? So this is the power of Shamata practice also, is that we are going to ask ourselves in our meditation, can we actually see the difference between the first moment of perception, which is okay, and the second moment of perception, because there's a time gap between these two. They happen very, very, very quickly together, but there is a time gap that is perceptible when you develop this temporal vividness of shamatha. And so you can actually watch the process. Appearance of perception, which is okay, it's true, that's all it is just perception. And then you can actually watch conceptualization happen. So if this happens, you're just watching dependent origination in action. And then what you can recognize also is that without conceptualization, remember what Samantabhadra said, conceptualization is the contributing condition to appearances arising. And so if there is no conceptualization, is there an appearance? No. So this is probably why that when we are moving from the second mode of mindfulness, which is manifest mindfulness, to the absence of appearances in absence of mindfulness, that the reason that all of a sudden there are no appearances, not all of a sudden, but that progressively as you develop, there are no appearances when you achieve the third mode of mindfulness, that there is no conceptualization. Because now you are resting fully upstream at the substrate consciousness, or more like it anyway, so that you are before conceptualizations actually form. So there are no appearances. So this is really the power of this integration of shamatha and vipassana, because it allows us to observe the process. And so it's very, very helpful to understand emptiness. And when you understand emptiness, you are understanding how things don't exist. They don't exist as inherently existent objects or things. So there is an absence of inherent existence in these objects. But dependent origination is the description and the process of how things do exist. And so things do exist as appearances, and we can actually watch dependent origination, the conceptual mind, actually at work. While we are observing the mind, we can actually watch dependent origination at work, creating objects. This is how Dujam Lingpa describes this in his text, The Foolish Dharma of an Idiot Clothed in Mud and Feathers. The foolish dharma of an idiot clothed in mud and feathers. Which is an extraordinary text by an extraordinary master. He says, in general, the whole physical world and its sentient inhabitants, with all their forms, colors, shapes, and appearances that arise from the five elements, are empty of their own identities, disappearing into the expanse of space, like clouds and mist. But even if you know that they are primordially empty from their own side, if you do not recognize them as subjects and objects of dualistic thinking, there is no benefit or harm. So, and then he continues, like a beggar eyeing someone else's treasure chest, your knowledge of the mere emptiness of phenomena is useless and trivial. So if you aren't able to actually watch and understand dependent origination, just knowing that things don't have a nature of their own is not all that beneficial to you in your daily life. Nagarjuna says in Precious Garland of Advice, when emptiness is thoroughly known, unhealthy views and afflictive emotions are thoroughly purified. Through what is emptiness known? It is known through seeing dependent arising. Buddha, the supreme knower of reality, said, what is dependently produced is not inherently produced. So this is interesting. Nagarjuna says that emptiness is known through seeing dependent arising. You know emptiness and you see dependent arising. And so this is exactly what we're going to try to do. Lama Tsongkhapa said on this same point, when as soon as you recognize the infallibility of dependent origination, your understanding destroys all grasping at real objects. Then your analysis of the correct view is complete. So dependent origination, how things actually do exist. And how do things exist, actually? Well, it's said that in Madhyamaka philosophy anyway, there are three necessary points for things to exist, that bring things into existence. First of all is causes and conditions. And then you could say the causes and conditions, it seems to me anyway, produce a suitable basis of parts. And then upon these parts, the third factor of dependent origination is at work, and that is conceptual designation. And so by the power of conceptual designation and grasping to this conceptual designation, then all things come into existence. And so if a thing could be produced only by causes and conditions and parts, then why wouldn't the appearance of this banner here look to me the same that it would look to a bat? Because the causes and conditions, the physical causes and conditions, have produced this physical thing. But what is very important, and the most important, the key to dependent origination in Madhyamaka philosophy is the third element, which is the conceptual designation. And so you can say then that because of conceptual designation, and each of us is designating something that is based uniquely on our own experience of the world, how we were raised, the culture that we grew up in, all of these things are going into producing causes and conditions for what I conceptually designate. And karma, fine point on that, but let's just say many causes and conditions that are producing the conceptual designation. So this actually puts each of us, you could say, in the center of our own universe. So this is another correspondence, I think, between Buddhism and leading edge of contemporary physics, which states that basically there is not a universe, meaning one, universe that we are all inhabiting, but that there is a multiverse. And in Buddhism, then, the implication is that basically there is we inhabit a multiverse, and each of us is the center of our own multiverse. And so you could say we are the center of our own mandala. But that doesn't mean that I am the only one, because you exist in the same way that I exist. You are at the center of your mandala, I'm at the center of my mandala, and we all, because of the interdependence of our mandalas, we all become causes and conditions for each other as well. So there is this real entanglement of our mandalas, so that allows us to live in societies and have a common culture. But fundamentally, we are all inhabiting our own universe. And then Dujam Lingpa, in this analysis of dependent origination and the role of conceptuality, uses the example of a pot, a clay pot. And he asks, when does a clay pot become a pot? So we start off with a lump of clay, and then the potter fashions the lump of clay into a pot. But does the clay that we began with go out of existence? Or is it transformed into something else? And the potter then shapes it into the shape of a pot. So is that when it becomes a pot? Or is it when it is fired in a kiln? Is that when it becomes a pot? Or when a glaze is applied to it, a coating, like a coloring, applied to the pot, is that when it becomes a pot? Or when it is used as a pot, is that when it becomes a pot? When does that clay that you begin with become a pot? Can you find a particular point in this whole process where you can say, that is it? And in Madhyamaka philosophy, the answer is that it becomes a pot when you call it a pot, when you label it a pot, and when you conceptually designate it as a pot. And for many beings who are in the center of their mandala, that lump of clay never becomes a pot, because they never conceptually designate it as a pot. For a dog, it may just be a toy of some sort, but it never becomes a pot. And then finally, just before we go off and take a break, take a look at your handout, and you see this image on the page there. And just take a look at it and ask yourself, what is it? 2. So isn't that interesting? So this is a very easy image to do this with. And this is probably very familiar to many of you. But even if it is, look at it and watch it go back and forth. And it is really a striking experience to see, to feel the mind actually create the object. So is it a duck, a canard? I remember that from ice climbing technique. There's a duck walk in ice climbing from Yvonne Chenard. Canard. So is it a canard or is it a hare, a rabbit? So which is it? Can it be two things at once? Well, it's not, is it? It just goes back and forth. So I think this is very, very helpful to just familiarize yourself with that and recognize the moment, the instant that it becomes a duck, the instant that it becomes a rabbit. And what is it that is turning it into that? Is it the lines on the paper are changing? Are the causes and conditions different? Is the basis of designation different? The basis of parts, is that different? Those are the same. The paper hasn't changed. What's different is the third element, the conceptual designation. And it happens instantly, doesn't it? It just back and forth. So as you are then doing your Shamata practice throughout the day and for the remainder of the retreat, this is a very powerful way of recognizing this first point of Wangchuk Dorje, the ninth Karmapa. All appearances are mind. What does that mean? All appearances depend on, first, the primary cause of Klishta-manas, I am, which then divides the world into subject and object. So that's the primary cause. And then the second point, or the second factor, is conceptual designation. What does conceptual designation feel like? As I am watching the first moment that Yangtang Rinpoche says is okay, and then the second moment. What happens in the second moment? That. It becomes a duck. It becomes a rabbit. And you can watch it, and you can experience it. While you are watching these appearances arise to your still, clear awareness in Shamata practice. So we will attempt that when we come back after a 6-minute break. Why don't we just come back at 11 o'clock? Begin by settling the body in its natural state. releasing physical tension, wherever you find it, on the exhalation. So that you find the relaxed ease of the body. And this relaxed ease leads to a contentment that allows the body to remain still. And along with relaxing the body, by releasing tension, release grasping to a conceptual body. An image of the body. A designation, this is my body. A sense of I to be found in the body. Release all of those into space on the exhalation. And discover the natural state of the body, beyond conceptualization. You know the body by way of tactile sensations. These tactile sensations themselves are like Yangtang Rinpoche said, these are okay. So if you know tactile sensations of the body and have released a conceptual body, the sensations you experience in the body may be experienced as being like occurring in space, simply arising, with no owner. And settle your speech in its natural state. The natural state is non-conceptual. Non-conceptual silence. All of this unceasing chatter of the mind depends first of all on a sense of I am, and then on conceptualization. Rest in the natural state, beyond even I am, the natural state of speech. And then settle your mind in its natural state, which is pure awareness, luminous and knowing, still and spacious. It is the space of awareness in which all conceptualizations arise. Even this appearance of I am arises within this space of awareness. And as you are resting in this natural state of the mind, appearances will naturally arise. And as these appearances arise, first of all, know the difference between the stillness of your awareness and the movement of these appearances arising within the still space. Just as the movement of a bird across the sky does not set the sky in motion, know the difference between the stillness of awareness and these movements that come and go. And as appearances continue to arise within this still, spacious awareness, have a simultaneous experience of the stillness of awareness, knowing the movement of these appearances. your still awareness is set in motion by grasping to one of these appearances. First of all, as being other. It conceptualizes this appearance, names it, identifies it, prefers that it stay or that it go. And it goes wandering with it. The spacious awareness shrinks to the size of the appearance. And you go wandering in a non-lucid dream. So to maintain the stillness of awareness, a radical impartiality is required, in which you do not prefer this appearance over another. However pleasant or unpleasant this appearance, just let it be. Let it be, and it will go, while your awareness remains still. And this radical impartiality that supports your Shamata practice depends on vipassana, knowing the nature of this appearance. So first of all, recognize that this appearance that has arisen is mind. It is nothing more substantial than a dream appearance. And so there is nothing to grasp to. View it for what it is. Only an insubstantial appearance of mind itself. Being able to be simultaneously aware of the stillness of awareness and the movement of appearances is like being balanced on the edge of a knife. And you can find that very subtle point of balance after your mind has been wandering. And instead of waking up from the dream, let the dream continue. Let this flow of appearances flow on. The appearances are never the problem. And the appearances were not the cause of your wandering. It was simply the lack of lucidity. So add a light touch of lucidity, simply knowing these appearances for what they are. And rest in this stillness of awareness. Which is the experience of lucid dreaming in the waking state. And then when you find this very subtle spot that feels like lucid dreaming in the waking state, then it becomes very apparent to you that these appearances that are arising are dream appearances. All appearances are mind. pleasant or unpleasant this appearance. Just let it be. Let it be and it will go. While your awareness remains still. And this radical impartiality that supports your Shamata practice depends on Vipassana, knowing the nature of this appearance. So first of all, recognize that this appearance that has arisen is mind. It is nothing more substantial than a dream appearance. And so there is nothing to grasp to. View it for what it is. Only an insubstantial appearance of mind itself. Being able to be simultaneously aware of the stillness of awareness and the movement of appearances is like being balanced on the edge of a knife. And you can find that very subtle point of balance after your mind has been wandering. And instead of waking up from the dream, let the dream continue. Let this flow of appearances flow on. The appearances are never the problem. And the appearances were not the cause of your wandering. It was simply the lack of lucidity. So add a light touch of lucidity, simply knowing these appearances for what they are. And rest in this stillness of awareness. Which is the experience of lucid dreaming in the waking state. And then when you find this very subtle spot that feels like lucid dreaming in the waking state, then it becomes very apparent to you that these appearances that are arising are dream appearances. All appearances